And the European Commission has warned Italy it will launch disciplinary steps over the country's growing debt. Now, the Commission has vowed to resort to this if Rome fails to adopt belt-tightening measures worth at least 0.2% of its GDP by the end of April. The move puts further pressure on the Italian government to implement unpopular measures as the country faces early elections this year. But the EU executive arm had little room for more leniency, and Italy is set to increase its huge public debt despite obligations to cut it. The latest round of Commission economic forecasts showed Italy's public debt would rise to an all-time high of 133.3% of GDP.
Today,
now, Mariam
there would be a
Zaidi
case
now
to
joins
open the excessive deficit procedure for Italy. But we will come back to this decision in spring on whether to recommend opening the EDP, and this decision will be made on the basis of Commission's spring forecast and after verifying the delivery of the commitments that Italy had been taken. Those commitments should be delivered by the latest in April.
Donc eu des progrès. Mais
progress has been made, but it remains to be confirmed. We certainly need to continue these reforms and do more. It will be the responsibility of the next government, the one that will emerge from the upcoming presidential and legislative elections, and we will pay great attention to the commitments that will be presented at that time.
Well, Mariam Zaidi now joins us in Brussels with more insight into the situation. Mariam, as always, welcome to the show. Now, the EU is threatening disciplinary action if Rome cannot deliver on its deficit-cutting measures as promised. With its public debt projected to rise to 133% of GDP this year, can Rome really deliver by the end of April?
Hi, Uche. Well, no doubt it's tough talk from the EU to its member state. Now, for a long time, Italy has needed to get its house in order. The eurozone, third largest economy, as you mentioned there, has public debts of 133.3% of its GDP, and last year that was around 132.8% of its GDP. So under EU rules, Italy needs to reduce its debt by about 3.6% of GDP annually. But as you were saying, also debts keep jumping up and the government doesn't seem to be handling the situation. So where are its problems? Well, of course, it suffers from poor growth, high unemployment, and its banks are in shambles. Monte dei Paschi, which is one of Italy's oldest banks, needed a massive €5 billion state rescue package, and two others are also headed in a similar situation. So also from the European Commission side, they make recommendations for Italy. It was on pensions, taxation, privatisation and labour reforms, and Italy has been found lagging. So we could say this is also possibly a long-term problem without any real resolution for Italy. But Italy, of course, isn't alone. We have Bulgaria, France, Croatia, Portugal and Cyprus, who have all been red flagged by the Commission. But with Italy, the Commission isn't optimistic that it can get the right results, despite, of course, promises made. Now, as you were saying, at the beginning of this month, Italy said it would cut its structural debt deficit by 0.2% by April. It was a positive move welcomed by the Commission, but will Italy then deliver? So in May, the Commission could fine Italy, although it's unlikely, or they could also put them under an even stricter regime. But whether Italy can then take that will, of course, be another matter.
Well, Mariam, how much of a risk is Italy right now to the eurozone, suddenly in light of the economic and political uncertainties going on there as well?
Sure. Well, Italy has one of course, the lowest growth rates in the EU, 0.9%. But an Italian exit from the Eurozone isn't even a question right now. It's not on the cards. Italians, of course, are getting fed up with their economic woes, and many do blame Brussels. Youth unemployment, for example, in southern Italy, 60%. But when it's paying 55 to, say, 75 billion euros just in interest on its debt, where then are these jobs going to come from? And politically, of course, it's not the best right now in Italy. Populism is on the rise with the post-Renzi government is trying to quell. The Five-Star Movement, who are polling first, have said that they would take Italy out of the euro if they were, of course, given the chance to have a referendum. So big problems for the EU project should they then come to power in 2018. Now, if the feeling really was that Italy was going under, markets would then attack government bonds and interest rates would increase, so it would be a bad situation in Italy. But of course, if Italy was to collapse, it could spell doom for the eurozone. So no doubt all tools will be used to stop that. And the European project, of course, it should be noted, its survival is bigger than its individual member states' problems.
That's right. Well, many thanks, Mariam, for those insights. Mariam Zaidi joining us there in Brussels.